Welcome to the Friendly Moms Club podcast with Jen and Karlee. We're the new mom friends you didn't know you needed.
We are creating a safe space to bring moms together, lighten the heaviness, and find joy in the everyday moments. Together, we will share our own experiences of being new moms while navigating the topics we wish more people talked about.
Join us every Monday to hear us skip the small talk and dive right into the uncomfortable.
Happy Mom Day!
Happy Mom Day! Welcome to the podcast, Meredith. We're so happy to have you. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I've been listening to you guys for a while now, since we met a few months ago, and really excited to be here. My name is Meredith Mackenzie. I am a registered clinical counselor and I'm a certified intuitive eating counselor. So what that looks like is I do therapy in my practice. I work a lot with women who struggle with body image and their relationship with food, and even more particularly binge eating. And then I also offer group coaching and education, like self-paced education for people who don't live in British Columbia and want to work on this as well.
Amazing.
Awesome. How did you get into this? Like, where did this all start for you? Because I know right now you're doing your PhD, right? In counseling or...
Yeah. Yes, I'm doing my PhD in counseling psychology at the University of British Columbia. Mm-hmm. And by the time this airs, I will probably be just weeks away from my dissertation defense and really be like right on the verge of being a doctor.
You're a busy mama. I have got to, like, that is so impressive. Congratulations.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited about it. It's like finally going to be a thing. But I got into this, and a lot of people will say research is me search. Mm-hmm. I struggled with my relationship with food for a lot of my adolescence, early 20s, and I was just drawn to the world of eating disorders because I really wanted to understand myself. And I knew I wanted to become a therapist. That was always kind of on the plan. And then I just couldn't deny that was where I wanted to work. More specifically, binge eating, my personal story, and I don't mind sharing this, is that while I struggled with a lot of restriction, chronic dieting, and being very careful with my food, when I finally decided that I didn't want to do that anymore, I didn't have the support or help, and it quickly turned into binge eating and emotional eating, and it just really got out of control, and I felt so alone. I visited family doctors, I visited a dietitian, and nobody could really help me with what I needed. And so personally, and I have worked for some of the regional eating disorders programs within British Columbia, and the services just are not available for people who struggle with binge eating. So in private practice, that's where I wanted to focus.
I know just from my own experience and from people I've talked to that, like, binge eating kind of just, it's not something that has the support because it's almost like not pathologized enough. Like, it doesn't meet all of the criteria. So you're kind of like, you're fine, just stop eating. When really there's so many layers to it.
Do you feel that a lot of, we've talked about this in another episode, but a lot of people really take the time to start looking into this when they become moms? Like, I know for me that I always had that diet culture, emotional eating, things like that. Like, there was always that back and forth in what diet and which fad am I going to fall into now. But once I became a mom is when I started noticing all of my worst habits, and I really wanted to make changes. Do you find a lot of people come to you after that, when they started realizing I need to take better care of myself and this isn't actually healthy?
Yeah, it's actually, I see an influx in clients kind of during pregnancy as the body is changing. And people will notice, I'm feeling just terrified that my body is changing, as well as I want to nourish myself well for this growing baby, and then postpartum as well. And I think there's two reasons for that. One being we are so focused, and I think life, not to be overly cheesy, but life gets a new meaning when you're a mom, and you start to see things in a different way. And you start to see what really matters here, and you want to be a good representation for your children and make sure that you're not passing on any poor habits. So I think that's one reason. And then the other is we become so introspective about, who am I now? Who do I want to be? My body is not mine alone anymore. I'm sharing my body with somebody else. And I want to be the best version of me. And what does that look like? You're kind of reinventing yourself in motherhood. And I think a lot of people then will come to their relationship with food at that point.
Yeah.
Do you find that it can kind of go both ways for people too? So like for myself, my whole life, my whole identity has been about what I looked like, because I was an athlete and I was an elite athlete and I played at university level and the provincial team. So for me, like my body was, I was an athlete, and that was what I put out to the world based on what I looked like. And then I became a mom and my body changed so much. And I got to this point where I was like, okay, one, like, who the heck am I? I don't look like that athlete anymore. I don't feel like that athlete anymore. So I'm going to go one of two ways. I'm either going to go into the side where I'm like, all bodies are good bodies. This is what I look like. What I look like it's not who I am. Or I deep dive into the other end, back into disordered eating of like, I need to make myself look a certain way because that is my identity, even though it's changed. So do you find sometimes when people go into motherhood, they go either one way where they're like embracing what their body looks like and practicing body neutrality and like relearning like, who am I? Or they get pulled back into that disordered eating or eating disorders?
Yeah. And I think you've pointed out a few things. One, if someone could genuinely say all bodies are good bodies and I love my body as it is, there is a whole other definition of what that actually looks like in practice, because I think that's one of the misconceptions about intuitive eating and body acceptance is that, oh, that just means we don't care about our bodies anymore and we just let all things fly. And that is not what I want anyone to think, that that's what we're doing. Instead, like, truly loving your body, and we can talk about this in a bit, of like, truly loving your body is truly loving your body and showing it love in all different ways. And then that is very health focused. But I think on two sides, and this is where like it really intersects with just how we see women in our society and some of the traditional views of like, either you can become a mom with like air quotes and wear the frumpy clothes and just give up, and you just kind of be like, well, I'm not a sexual being anymore. I'm just somebody's mom. I'm not my individual self anymore. And I think I've seen a lot of women go into that where they feel like they really lose themselves in motherhood. I will like raise my hand and say the first year of my son's life, when I was dealing with postpartum depression, I was like, makeup, who cares? I just need to have comfy clothes on. I need to be cozy. I need to, just deal with the physical discomfort of my body right now. And my body image really suffered because of that. On the flip side, absolutely, we get this message, and I know we had talked about it before, about the like, you need to bounce back, of the pressure that you should be trying to get yourself back to the pre-baby look and body. And identity is such a big piece when you're becoming a mom, of like, who am I? What type of parent do I want to be? How do I want my career to look? Like all of those things. And so often we try to find that control through our bodies and how we look.
For sure. And like a lot of us, our coping skills growing up in like the diet culture world was either to restrict and diet as a way to like cope and manage our feelings, or to binge eat and like go crazy. Like those were my coping mechanisms growing up. Like I didn't really have anything else because I was, that is what I did. And that is how I like found structure and rigidity in my life. Neither of them were actually helpful, but I thought they were. I'm glad that I'm not the only one that like goes back and forth there. So before we dig too much into this, can you just touch on what is diet culture? What are we talking about when we say we grew up in diet culture, and what does that all mean? So somebody listening being like, I don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, well, that is a huge question to ask.
Yeah, give us the Coles notes. Coles notes, yeah.
Yeah. So diet culture is essentially that subculture or, overarching culture, mostly in North America, European countries, where the ideal is that thin is better than fat, and health is related to the amount of body fat you have on your body. And it's this like very insidious, quiet way of saying there is a good way to live your life and there's a bad way to live your life. And you should be measuring up to these standards of having a toned body, a fit body, a thin body. And does it affect all people? Absolutely, but more so people in female bodies. And there's more of that expectation put on women. And like we can go way back to, what are the societal standards of men being breadwinners and bringing in money, and women being beautiful and, attaining their spouse that way. Like there's lots of things that we can see in history that would put towards that. But essentially it's that underlying message that if you're not trying to get yourself more fit or trying to lose weight in some way, that you're somehow doing something wrong.
And the whole idea that like what we look like is tied to our worth, and that like as a mom we're supposed to be fit and we're supposed to bounce back, but without trying it's just supposed to happen. And like breaking away from that time in my life where like all I wanted to do was change what I looked like, and I tied my whole worth as a human and as a mom into what I looked like. And breaking away from that is so hard, especially because like I don't really know where to go from that, because in my head it's like I'm either trying to like in air quotes look better because that makes me healthier in air quotes, and the other side is just like going off the deep end and not caring what I look like and wearing sweatpants every day. But like what you're saying is like that's not the other option, and the other option is like body acceptance. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, and like what like body neutrality, and like how it's not just diving off the deep end and eating Oreos breakfast, lunch, and dinner?
Yeah. So what you just said, body neutrality versus body acceptance, or even body positivity, knowing that we live in diet culture and we will never not live in a diet culture, most likely, unfortunately, it's understanding that maybe you feel really positive about your body some days, but that is not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to respect your body and see it as something that does amazing things for you. Acceptance and neutrality is saying like, this body is a good body regardless. This body deserves respect. It deserves rest. It deserves to be treated with kindness. It did nothing wrong. It is only doing wonderful things for me. So to kind of like bring your attention back to how can I care for something? The same way, you know, let's compare a neutral thing like the plants that you have in your home. These poor ones right here. Yeah. You know, they need a little bit of love, but kind of like me, they need water. They need to have sunlight. They need to have all these things to thrive. And I can give that to my body as well. So that's like just step one. Like, let's treat myself with a shred of respect and importance and worth, that all bodies are deserving of these things. And then from there, like if I wanted to have a better relationship with my body, what do I do for somebody that I care for? So the pressure when we think about diet culture and like trying to achieve that thin ideal, it's usually this outward goal that we have. It's something that's kind of external to us. I'm going to follow this meal plan and it's going to tell me the right way to lose weight, or I'm going to follow this gym trainer or Instagram person and they're going to tell me what I'm supposed to do. And the step that I work with my clients on to find this healthier relationship with themselves is to turn inwards. And that's not something that a lot of us are comfortable with, especially if we've had this history of diet culture that's really impacted us. And then again, as moms, because we put our focus on people outside of ourselves so much, but to be able to say like, what do I need right now? So maybe for you, Karlee, as an athlete, that is, I really need to be in the gym. I feel invigorated. I feel energized. I just feel so positive and pumped after I go to the gym. That feels great for me. And I love how my body feels like that what do we call it? Like the endorphin rush. I love that feeling. That's not about how perky my butt is. That's about how awesome I feel in my body. And to be able to say, hey, before I went back, I wasn't able to lift like 15 pounds and that was really hurting. Now I'm doing 20. That is awesome. To be able to have that is like, that's where you start focusing on the power of your body.
I'm not usually a crier, but I
know, I'm like, I want to know, Karlee.
Because for so long, I have just like disrespected my body because it doesn't like look or behave the way that like it used to for me. And just recently, I've started going back to the gym as like not a way to like change my body, but just because I enjoy it and I love lifting heavy weights and it brings me back to like what I used to do. And like I'm still stuck in that in between where like, well, I go to the gym and I'm like lifting these big heavy weights, but then I still feel like uncomfortable because I'm like, well, I'm not in the body I used to be, but I'm just trying to like let that go, that like the way that I can take care of myself is like moving my body in ways that I enjoy it. So like just hearing you say that, I was like, oh, I can care about my body, you know?
Yeah.
I think that in society, we don't allow that. Like it's that if you're not dieting, like there's that one side, right? The whole diet culture. But then if you want to get stronger, people say that's not that body acceptance. Like, you shouldn't care how your body looks, right? Like, it goes to that extreme that if you care about going to the gym and like lifting more weights and fitting into these jeans, like, that's not okay. You like, I don't know how to explain how I'm feeling, but I get what you're saying, Karlee, and that you almost felt like you couldn't want to go back into the gym unless you wanted to lose all that weight and be your old self. Yes. You like felt like there's this disconnect that you weren't allowed to just enjoy going back to the gym and wanting to do that for you because it makes you feel good. And this is something my husband and I are working on. And every time it comes up in a relationship and I say like, you know, I just want to be healthier. I want to feel good. And it's not about losing weight. Or I'll say, I really need you to get back into what you used to do. Like, he used to work out and do jiu-jitsu, and he was so much happier when he was doing that. And so I've said, like, I really think you should get back into it. I'm saying this out of a place of love. I'm not telling you need to change your body. I'm not saying you need to lose weight. I'm not saying it from any like appearance. I'm saying it that you are happier when you are moving your body in a way that makes you feel good. But I always feel like I have to, like, every time we have this conversation, I'm like, it's not that for you to lose weight. It's not that I don't find you attractive, or I'm always like, you just are happier and you have more energy. You show up better as a husband. Like, you come home energized and just like, there's a glow, which I'm sure he would hate that if I said that, but there's like a glow to him, right? When he like does this thing that he enjoys. So why are we making it out to be like, you are allowed to want to exercise. You are allowed to want to, you know, lift a certain weight. You're also allowed to not exercise. If that doesn't make you feel good, you know, what just brings you joy and what makes you love your body?
I think it goes back to what Meredith said about like loving ourselves and taking care of ourselves because we're worthy of that, and not basing it on what we look like. And you actually, Meredith, did a reel or a story about this a while ago on your Instagram about getting back into the gym because it's something that makes you feel good and it not being about what your body looks like. And I'm like, we just need more people talking about this, that like there's an in-between, that you can love your body and take care of yourself, or maybe not even love your body, what it looks like, but love yourself and like feel worthy of taking care of yourself without having the focus of changing what you look like or following a diet, or, you know?
Yeah, like at the beginning of this year, it's a bit cliche, but I had a word of the year, and my word of the year, knowing I was going to have a baby in March and try to defend my dissertation, was me. And like, what do I really need? And that is as like minuscule as, I need a shower today. Husband, you were please going to watch the kids so I can have a shower. And like, how many times since motherhood have I been like, oh, well, I'd really like a shower, but the kids really need me. I'm not going to do it right now. So what does Meredith need? Meredith needs to go to the gym. Like, that is something that I've put off because of being busy with school or work or kids. But Meredith needs to go to the gym because she needs to feel powerful.
Yeah. It's such a powerful feeling. I'm the same. Like, it makes me feel so good lifting weights. Like, I don't love running or like anything like that. To me, like, lifting weights makes me feel good. And it's not about like getting a 6-pack and getting huge biceps. It's just like, yeah, I feel invigorated doing it. And yeah, it's good that I think we can bring awareness that it is okay if you want to exercise. It is okay if you want to do those things, but it's also okay if you don't want to. However,
and for anybody,
however you are showing yourself love and like being true to who you are and what actually brings you joy and makes you feel good. And that might look different for everyone. And maybe you have to work to find out what that is going to look like for you. And yeah, for me, that's always been a huge part. It's part of my mental health. It's, you know, it's all tied together. But motherhood just has such a way of bringing up all of these feelings and emotions again. And you said, you know, step one, like these plants, is sunlight and water. Those are actually two very hard things when you become a mom. Like, thank goodness my husband was bringing me my water bottle filled up, because I'm not sure I would have drank water otherwise. Like, leaving the house to get fresh air and sunshine wasn't actually easy when you're in that like beginning of postpartum. And so that's step one. No wonder there's this huge disconnect for so many women when they become moms, because the step one of really respecting your body and respecting yourself is hard to do. Like, it becomes so hard.
It's an art. When you have clients that come to you who are pregnant or postpartum and they're really struggling with body image, with having a body that's changing, what are some things that you say to them? What are some strategies you give them to kind of reframe how they're viewing it, if we haven't already said them already?
Yeah. In my experience, like working with women all throughout their life, body image and the way we feel about our bodies, as well as our relationship with food, so often tends to be the symptom of something else happening. So is it problematic and is it a main focus? Absolutely. It's very distressing when you're not feeling good about your body, but it also tends to be a reaction to something else happening. And so as you're going through pregnancy, as you're postpartum, I think the bigger thing that we also need to talk about and make aware is that you're going through a massive transition, that your identity is changing so much, that you're thinking about all these changes that are going to happen. And so often we don't talk about that. I've heard you guys on your podcast talk so many times about the invisible aspects of motherhood that we're all struggling with. And that's why this podcast is so helpful for other women. But I'd like to bring that to the forefront as well. Like, your body's changing and that's a really hard transition, but let's also talk about all the other things. Like, what have you lost in motherhood? Like, what are you grieving right now that is not a part of you, that you really are scared that you're never going to get back again, or that you feel like you might have had to give up forever? Are you ever going to get back to who that woman was before? And are you really missing her? Yes, your body doesn't look like how it did pre-baby, and it maybe never will, but you're also maybe never going to get some of those other things back too. Like, how can we talk about the bigger picture here? Because we try to control the things we fear through our the way we relate to food and movement. So that's a big piece that I like to talk to clients about. And then the other is, because again, like, doing anything with movement, doing anything with our food is like a reaction. It's a behavior. It's what we try to do. I like to help people slow down. And this is when the tears come in of, let's sit with that feeling. Let's sit with that grief, because that is the uncomfortable feeling that we're trying to run away from. And we try to fix it. And the solution isn't the right solution in most situations, but like, how can we sit with that feeling for a little while first?
It hits the nail on the head for me, because especially if I'm having a lot of anxiety, I just want to go get ice cream, because I get this like momentary quick fix of like, this tastes good. And then it, like, I don't know, distracts me for 10 minutes. And I feel like that is such a good solution some days. But like, that's because I'm avoiding whatever it's making me feel anxious, or I don't want to have to like deal with whatever thoughts are going on in my head. So it's like that quick fix of, I'm going to have ice cream. And I'm such an emotional eater, and I know this, but that's right. It's because I want to ignore all those, like, I don't want to have to deal with that. So asking those questions and actually sitting with those emotions is definitely a hard step, but I can see that in order to really make progress, you have to ask yourself and like look inside you and see what's actually going on and what things are being brought up.
Definitely. I feel like that approach is so much more useful than just telling people or telling yourself, well, you made a baby. And like, I've been guilty of saying that before, but I swear to God, if one more person says that to me, I'm probably gonna karate chop them. Because I'm like, I understand that I made life and that is a gift, but at the same time, all of these other people are making life and not looking like I do. So like, that approach for me like just doesn't work. Like, but like you said, looking in, like, what are the things we have to grieve in motherhood? And maybe that's something, instead of just telling us we should be grateful because we made life.
Yes, there is like a value to that of, I made life. Like, I think, many moons ago, I did my master's degree, and my thesis was on body image and like engaging in disordered eating behaviors. And I did find that mothers have a lower incidence of body dissatisfaction. And that was linked to the function of their body and not objectifying themselves in the same way. I think that could probably, again, this is a master's level thesis. It was not like groundbreaking or anything like that. But that I think it can be linked to that, you know, you can see my uterus, my body carried this human being. Like, the reason I have super low iron right now is because my baby grew and I've fed my baby and I've birthed my baby and all these things. Like, my body is freaking awesome. And that is something to connect to, and maybe using your own language that feels like authentic to you to be able to say like, my body is badass, is something helpful. But yeah, when it feels like it's just like, well, you should be grateful, then that isn't as helpful.
Yes.
Definitely. Because, like, you're right. Like, we grew life. Like, that's pretty cool. And it, like, it makes us look past the idea that our body is just to look pretty. Like, my body is to make people, and, like, that's cool. And then to feed them from my body. Like, but then I think it's just sometimes when people say it, it sounds like dismissive. Like, well, how can you care about what your body looks like when you made life? And it's like, well, I live in a world obsessed with diet culture. That's why. You know?
Yeah. And I think, though, too, that that's the other piece where we were saying, like, there is that intersection with just, like, how we see mothers and, like, the role of mothers. Like, you are not dismissed as a human being, as an individual, as a woman, because you've created a life. You're not now just mom who doesn't have to worry about what she looks like. Like, yes, you created life and you deserve your own individual value.
I think it's very interesting also, like, this is just kind of a side about body image and about after having kids, is that women carry these children and they're actually having the baby. But yet when their body changes, it's not as accepted as if a dad's body changes after having kids. And people, like, glorify this dad bod and, like, oh, he's a dad. Like, and that seems to be, like, readily accepted in today's society. But yet women who are actually going through birth and carrying this child and breastfeeding, it's not as accepted for their body to change. And it's just, it makes me so sad to think about. It's just so sad, though, when you think about it, that how is that okay? I think that there is a lot of progress that's been made on body image in society as a whole. Like, if you look at the Olympics and all the coverage out there about, like, look at what an athlete's body can look like. Yes, it can look like that very thin six-pack ab, but can also look like this on the other end of the scale. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about BMI and how that's not the end-all be-all. And that's literally just a calculation based on your height and weight. That doesn't actually tell you if you're healthy or not and how much muscle you have. And, you know, like, there's lots of this that came up during the Olympics that I was happy to see about, but we're just still not there. Like, especially when it comes to mothers after having kids, we are still so far off the mark for body image and what is acceptable, and how we still make women feel like, yeah, they need to get up and put on makeup and their hair needs to be done when they leave the house. Like, if you're doing daycare drop-off, like, you should be dressed to the nines. Like, you should have it all together. Like, you need to be fit. You need to bounce back. Like, there's just so much work to be done still. And I think we're slowly moving there. We're just not there yet.
Do you think we'll ever, Meredith, do you think we'll ever get to a place where, like, diet culture isn't, like, so pervasive and taking over everybody's minds? Like, will we get there? I'm just curious. You can say no.
I really hope so.
Yeah, me too.
I really hope so. I just don't know if we'll see it in our lives.
Have you noticed?
I would hope that.
Have you noticed a shift?
I feel like that's a hard thing to say because I work in a very skewed world. I work with either people who are really struggling or the people that I associate myself with are very open-minded and very body accepting. So I don't think I'm the greatest assessor of that. Yeah.
That's fair.
Okay.
So I have one more question about body image. One thing Jen and I both noticed, and we've talked about on the podcast, is that when we became pregnant or when we were postpartum, we noticed a lot of people felt very entitled to make comments about our bodies that we did not appreciate. So how do you set those boundaries with friends or families talking about bodies, or even talking about, like, dieting around you when you don't want to hear about it? Because it's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. That is one of the most frustrating and intrusive things about diet culture, where we feel like we have ownership or rights to be able to be commenting on somebody else's very personal and private information. Like, would you ever comment on somebody's, like, penis size that you don't know? Like, you're not going to be like, hey, Joe, like, your penis looks quite large today. It's just not something that we do. But for some reason, we think it's okay to comment on the way somebody looks. And I think it's quite invalidating just in general. But you don't know what somebody is going through or what's going on for somebody or how they're feeling about something. So why would you ever comment on that? So I think there's a few ways to deal with it. Yeah, I've seen some really cute posts on social media that, like, you can say the really, like, demure casual thing, keep it neutral. You could be a little bit spicy with it. You can use it as an educational moment. And I think that however you do approach it depends on where you're at, like, what feels right to you. Like, if you're in a really sensitive, vulnerable space, maybe you just say, can you please not make that comment? That's not something I want to talk about right now. But it might also be an opportunity if it is within closer family circles or friends, maybe not in that moment, but in a quiet, we're having coffee one-on-one. Let's have a discussion. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going through some stuff right now. I'm having some trouble with my body changing. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't make any comments about this. Or I really have a hard time when I hear you talk about your diet. Can you please try not to make those comments around me? Mm-hmm. The really hard part, and this is the thing where we just cannot control other people. So many people are unaware of how pervasive and common their conversation is about food and dieting and bodies, that I've had lots of clients that I work with ask family members to stop making comments, or they are well aware that they're in eating disorder recovery and working with a therapist, and they still make the comments. And so another piece is to just have a bit of an inner dialogue with yourself of saying, this comment was made for them. That reflects their anxiety about their relationship with food and is not about me.
Yeah, having to repeat something to yourself as they... Yeah, I've had this has come up for me, so I get that. I also just wanted to acknowledge what you said, like you don't know what someone else is going through, because there's a lot of medical things, like this is just two sides of the coin of someone who's going through like chemotherapy may lose weight. And so someone might be like, oh, you look great. You look like you've lost weight. And they're like, cool, thanks. I have cancer. And like, or on the other flip side, like if you're taking steroids for something that could make you gain weight. And so someone is then coming like, oh, have you not been going to the gym? Or, and you're like, well, I'm actually dealing with a serious medical condition. Like there's so many different things that, regardless of the reason, but it could be either, right? There could be so much more going on with their life that we don't know. So why do we feel like we should be talking about it? Or
even the conversation that people look better when they're thinner is so problematic. And whenever I go through a cycle of being smaller, and whether it was intentional or not, and I get comments of, oh, you look great, in my head I'm like, well then what did I look like before? A sack of shit? So then that just reaffirms that, like, well, I'm more worthy when I'm smaller, But that's a whole other problem too. That is it.
One thing I just want to add, if anybody finds that they feel that they enjoy giving compliments to people and that it's something that they're like, oh, but I'm trying to be nice, I just want to say, you can still be nice and you can say something, but maybe focus on something that's not appearance based. Even if it's just like, oh, you look really happy today, or like how Jen, you were saying, you look like you're glowing. That can be a compliment about the way somebody is looking that has nothing to do with the aesthetic of their body, and it might convey the same thing. Like if you've ever gotten compliments because you've lost weight, I would hope that they're not actually about the body size that you're in, but maybe like, Karlee, it looks like you've really been putting yourself first. Like, I'm really proud of you for making time for yourself to go to the gym. Nothing to do with how you're looking, but like, I'm assuming, maybe I know you, I'm assuming that you're actually putting yourself first right now.
I really love that you acknowledge that.
That's never come up that way. Yeah.
No, that's
important.
That's so true. And and
that's something that we can all do for our part to kind of like move away from diet culture, because it is pervasive, and we all grew up in the 80s, 90s when that is what you did. You counted your almonds and that was just part of life.
I have to ask you guys, because I know you have a son, but Jen, I know you have a daughter, at least one daughter, right?
I have two. Yeah.
The thing I'm personally struggling with now is, how do you teach this to children when it's so natural? I look at my daughter and she is gorgeous. Like, she is beautiful. I think she's just gorgeous and beautiful, probably because she's my daughter. But I don't want that word to become associated with an aesthetic. And I'm like, I still want to like gush and love about you, but I don't want you to think that your worth is tied to how you look. And so I do try to sprinkle in like all the others. And she's 5 months. She doesn't get it yet. But I tell my son he's beautiful too.
Have you ever heard of the book, How to Raise Daughters Who Like Themselves, or How to Raise Daughters Who Don't Hate Themselves? I can't remember how it's worded. Have you heard of that?
I need to look that up. No, I haven't.
Oh, it's so good. And she actually wrote one for boys as well. And she's Australian, and she actually talked on a podcast, and I've shared it on our Instagram before, but I will put it in the link in the notes below. I'll share the podcast that she's on, Beyond the Bump, where they talk about it, and then also the actual book. Listening to this podcast and her strategies for how to raise girls that don't hate themselves, I was like, this is mind-blowing. And a lot of it has to do with things we say and what we talk about. And for girls, we're always like, oh, what a cute dress, you're so beautiful. And then you never say that to a boy. So then girls they grow up believing that their worth is just tied to what they look like and what they wear. And so it's good. I'll share it because it'll answer a lot of these questions you're having. It's really
I'm struggling with the exact same thing, though. And
yeah, I can't have an intellectual conversation with a 5-month-old.
Oh,
like,
God,
she
no.
just doesn't understand when I try to explain diet culture to her.
Yeah.
what? She doesn't? Come on, 5 months.
Not receptive.
Yeah.
But I think it is something that for us, it's so important. So for like breaking those generational cycles that like my mom still talks about dieting, and every time she tells me about somebody she saw, the first thing she says is, oh, I saw so and so, and the second thing is they've either gained weight, they've lost weight, they look great, ooh, some negative comment about what they look like. And I've told her so many times, like, I don't want to hear you talk about other people's bodies, don't talk about my body, just don't talk about bodies. But it's so ingrained in her, she'll say it and then be like, oops, and then like make a joke about it. And I'm like, okay, well, this isn't fucking funny. That's my goal as a parent, and I don't know how to do it. I don't actually know how I'm going to do this, but like my goal is to not raise Henry and any other future kids that their worth is tied to what they look like. But like, that's a big problem. It's hard.
Or even that is like data that you're collecting about other people.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
yeah.
You're kind of describing that you have this ritual, and I'm sure she does with other people too, of, oh, let me catch you up on what's been going on in my life. I saw this person, this is what was happening for them. But for her, the first thing is, well, how did they look? And so, like, how do we talk about our friends and people that are in our lives that have nothing to do with their bodies?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I don't want people talking about my body. It's none of their damn business.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe let's get into a bit of intuitive eating now. I think that we talked a lot about like the body image and some of the maybe problems or questions that we ask ourselves when we are pregnant and after having kids that kind of come up. But then where do we go from there? And how can we get to a better place where we are honoring and respecting our body and kind of getting into that place where we're not constantly dying or doing the next diet and just getting into a more, I guess, neutral place of intuitive eating and feeding your body and fueling it with what you need. And yeah, not this like, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. I eat really good and then really bad, really good, really bad. And so instead of like the little waves, I'm like, yeah, that's.
Yeah. So tell us, what the heck is intuitive eating?
Yeah.
And how do we do it?
Yeah, so intuitive eating is a series of principles that were developed and introduced by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch, who are two dietitians. I become certified as an intuitive eating counselor, and the training is just so fantastic, but also the principles are so interwoven with psychology that these women are just, they're super smart. And the way, like, you don't have to be a dietitian to take on this work. It's very psychological and just very supportive. But essentially within the 9 principles, it goes through, you know, what is your relationship with food and why does diet culture exist? And then reconnecting with our bodies. So like I said before, so much of diet culture is external. When we switch off from listening to ourselves intuitively, like even just think of any of your kids, how many times have you put out a plate of food and one day the plate's empty and the next day they're barely eating anything? And you can see that they're going through these little growth changes. But if we were to do the same for ourselves, we end up feeling guilty. Like we always feel like we need to be reducing our portion size or not letting ourselves have as much. And the reality is that our bodies are always going through ebbs and flows, and they need different things at different times, the same way we have different needs for sleep or thirst or going to the washroom, movement. When we're feeling sick, we need different things. Our needs for food are the same. So it really is about getting back in touch with your body and what it is giving you signals for. And what's really interesting and also difficult to overcome is that we actually condition our bodies over the course of our lives to not pay attention to those cues and what our body's telling us. So many of the clients that I work with actually have dampened or turned down the volume on their hunger cues, and they're not eating sufficiently, and then they end up finding that they're emotionally eating in the evening. So there's lots of really tangible, easy strategies that we can implement in the beginning of our work to be able to make sure you're not binging or overeating in the evening because you're fueling yourself well throughout the day and starting to really listen to your body.
So you talked a little bit about what intuitive eating is. So how do we actually eat intuitively? Like if you're going to make yourself a meal, say you just recorded a podcast and you're going to go make yourself some lunch. What would you say to yourself? What would the process be? Like how would I make an intuitive plate for myself?
Yeah. So the first thing is to tune into your body, and where building that awareness of your hunger is so important, because if you're not aware of that, then you might be missing things. But how do you physically feel hunger? Currently, I'm starting to get a little bit hungry, so maybe anybody listening can listen to some of this. I feel it like right here in my throat, like at the base of my neck. It just feels almost like a little bit of a tugging or an empty feeling. My stomach, I don't feel anything in it yet. And I then typically will have like more thoughts of food and I'll feel a little bit lightheaded. But that's when I'm getting into like more of the hangry stage. Yeah. Mood is a big thing to look at too. Like, are you getting hangry? Are you getting irritable? Are you snappy? That's when you've maybe let yourself go too far. So if I was to say, okay, now I'm going to go down and I'm going to make myself some food. Hunger's the first thing. And then what do you want? What's the purpose of this meal? So do you have another block of work that you need to do? Typically, it's recommended to eat every 3 to 4 hours so that your body's getting enough fuel. But if I have 4 sessions back to back and I know that I'm not going to be able to eat for a little while, I want to eat something that's going to actually stick with me. So without getting into like hardcore dietetics or ever feeling like you need to be doing a really serious meal plan, eating something with a carbohydrate, a fat, and a protein is going to keep you sustained longer. So whether you're saying, I'm going to have a sandwich, it's going to have some deli meat on it, it's going to have some cheese for fat and some mayonnaise, tomatoes, that kind of thing. And if you have something that's like higher whole grains, then you're more likely to be satiated. But the other important piece is to not be judgmental of yourself with what you're eating. If you have a craving for a certain taste or a certain texture, those things are also really important to look at as well. So I've been on a real sweet kick lately since really pregnancy and breastfeeding. And I've been so thirsty that I've been really trying to take that into account. All I've been eating every morning is like smoothies with like sweet stuff in them. But then adding protein powder to it, adding a high fat Greek yogurt to it. So more so than what do I need to be eating? What can you add that's going to already be your favorite foods that you love, but it's going to be more sustaining and is maybe going to just keep you fuller longer.
Mm-hmm. I like what you said about like also considering like what flavors or textures or, you know, other things do you feel like? Because a lot of the times I'll be like, I really feel like some chips. I love like a handful of chips with a meal. I just find like the crunchiness so satisfying. But then I won't, because in my head chips are bad. And then the whole day I'm like snacking because I'm like looking for that texture where I could have just had a handful of chips or more than a handful of chips and not felt that like I was not satiated all day. And it's not like a hunger fullness. It's like I was wanting a certain texture or, you know?
Yeah. Taste hunger is a thing. Like having hunger for a specific thing is a thing. I'm also a huge fan, especially for like lunch and working from home, or if you're sitting and working, they call them girl dinner. I've been doing girl dinner for years, but like have the chips. Like, I don't know if either of you been to Costco. Their corn chips are so
good.
Amazing. They're super salty, so I love salty things too. And then have a little bit of cheese and some nuts and like a little baby orange. Like have a bunch of different things that you're getting that need for the chips and the crunchiness through that, but then you're also nourishing yourself with other things as well.
With the other stuff you need. I like that. That's important because like diet culture has taught us, you know, you either need to be like eating perfectly or you're failing. So like that in between where you can nourish yourself and you can nourish like your hunger, your taste hunger, while also still taking care of yourself. Like it's a whole new world that a lot of us have never existed in, because I can tell you I was not raised to be an intuitive eater. I was raised to ignore every feeling and like not a craving, but yeah, essentially to ignore everything and just eat based on like how many calories or how many points or like what, you know, like it's never a joy thing. And it wasn't until I married a chef that I realized that like you can actually eat for joy while also eating food that makes you feel good. You know, like it doesn't have to be this one or the other thing. So
yeah, I think that's one of the travesties of diet culture, particularly for anybody who grew up in the 90s or early 2000s, is that diet food or the things that we were taught were the right things to be eating if we were trying to be losing weight were disgusting.
Actually.
Like, they had no flavor. They made you felt hungry not too long after you ate them. Like, they just weren't satisfying. And one of the greatest joys that I've had is discovering that you can eat food that is incredibly nourishing, super tasty, and is still going to, like, you know, make you feel good later down the road. And it's really changed my relationship. I talk in my content quite a bit about my obsession with Crunchwrap Supremes from Taco Bell during my eating disorder days, because that was my cheat day food and I would go have it. And not that any food is good or bad and that I'm going to demonize Crunchwrap Supremes now, but a Crunchwrap Supreme does not contend with, like, fresh tacos from a fancy taco shop like a taqueria, and then it's going to have all this, like, fresh lettuce and sour cream and the crunch. And yeah, and those are, like, calorie wise, do I know what they contain? No, they could be comparable, but flavor wise, I prefer one, and I feel much more satisfied when I'm eating, and I don't feel guilty for eating it.
Exactly. It's something you're enjoying, and you're eating it and you're enjoying it, and you're probably full and feeling good after it, and you've satisfied your physical hunger and your taste hunger, and then you're not going through the drive-through on your way home because you weren't satisfied. Yeah. I remember somebody telling me that, oh, like, don't order a salad at restaurants because they're just as many calories as whatever. And for years, I'd be like, oh, can't do that. That's a waste because it's a salad. But then I've realized, like, I love restaurant salads because they meet all of the, like, taste requirements. Like, there's lots of fresh veggies, which I actually love, not because they're veggies, but because I just love the way they taste and make me feel. And then it has usually good cheeses and some sort of little crunchy bits that they've made there, and, like, a nice piece of meat and a yummy dressing. And, like, they're so good, but in my head for so long they were, like, not, in air quotes, worth it because they were, like, calorically expensive. But, like, now I'm like, well, that's stupid because they're so good. Diet culture.
Yeah. I'm doing a series on social media this summer called Reclaim Salad because I had the same thing, but also that salad ended up being this reduced food that I just associated with dieting. And so then I would get to the point when I was in recovery of, like, well, I can't eat a salad because that just triggers me too much. And so instead I'm making delicious salads this summer. And I've really enjoyed the book. Why am I not going to remember it now? I'm not even going to remember the name of it. Mandy's Salads. It's a really great cookbook, and it has, like, really yummy salads.
I remember you posting that, and we were talking in the DMs about broccoli salad.
Yes. You said your mother-in-law makes it.
Yeah, and it's so good. And forever in my head, I was like, oh, well, like, it's not a salad because it's covered in mayo. But you know what's really good? Broccoli covered in mayo with cheese and bacon and little crunchy bits. And it's one of my favorite. And I've actually been thinking about, like, adding something like that to our weekly meal prep to, like, add in. I like plates of food and bowls of just, like, all these different things and flavors. And I'm thinking, like, that would be such a good addition to add so you get that crunch you're looking for. And then, you know what? You're also eating some vegetables that taste good.
The internet is going crazy about the cucumber salads. Have you guys seen these videos about, like, different sauces you can make? And basically the guy just takes, like, a mandolin. I think that's what it's called, right? And you just, like, so you cut up, like, a whole cucumber, and he makes, like, a peanut sauce, and he makes other ones. And people are going crazy being like, this is actually delicious. Like, it tastes good. And, like, to put that in a bowl, Karlee, with, like, some rice and some good like, it would be so good.
With some salmon,
right?
Maybe some, like, air fried salmon. And
so when we get together, Karlee and I, we call them Karlee bowls because she's just like,
that's what they
this
are.
is what they are. So we eat Karlee bowls all the time, but they're always like, veggies, normally some greens, some rice or quinoa, like some sort of protein. And Karlee always makes really good homemade dressings. And, like, it is so good. You feel good eating it because you're like, we've covered all of our bases here. Like, we're actually fueling our body with good food. And it is just so good.
Love a good.
Okay, I wanted to ask because this is something I've always been told and kind of live by, but it sounds like this is kind of intuitive eating, maybe, is that, you know, when you really crave chocolate and everyone's like, oh, you can't eat chocolate, it's not good for you. So people don't eat it. And then all of a sudden they'll eat like 5 chocolate bars because they have held off so long because it's not good for you. And then they just binge eat it basically. Whereas I've always been told, like, instead of that, if you want chocolate, just go have a little piece of chocolate. And like, for me, I actually can. Like, I normally have a dark chocolate bar in my fridge, and I'll break off a piece and I put peanut butter on it, like the all natural peanut butter, because I just love it. And anyways, I can have like a square of that because it like gives me that, like, it tastes good and I like it and I crave it, but I don't need to eat a whole chocolate bar. Like, I just like that piece of it. And I've been trying to be better at, like, I can want chocolate
of you.
And I can have chocolate if I want it, and I don't need to eat the entire thing to like feel satisfied. So I'm trying to like, is this intuitive eating, or am I just like in a weird, the internet told me to do this, so I'm doing it?
Yeah. So I think that there is part of that would fit with intuitive eating, and part of it where I'm hearing lingering diet culture.
Yes.
And I hope you don't feel called out.
Yeah.
So much of what we see, and this is where even like the whole shift to I'm having a healthy lifestyle, I'm not dieting, it is still just diet culture, like a wolf in sheep's clothing. It is still there and it's still underlying. When you're saying, oh, if I just have that square of chocolate, then I don't need the whole chocolate bar, it's insinuating that if you do eat a whole chocolate bar, that you've done something wrong. Mm-hmm. And I want to like stave off eating that whole chocolate bar, so I'm just going to give myself a little nibble. That the intention is to not eat more. So intuitive eating would say, yes, if you have a craving and you just really want that thing, have it, because deprivation is only going to lead to more desire for that particular thing, and then you're going to feel like you've lost control. The other thing that goes into that psychology of losing control is like you feel like, I never have it, and then when I have it, well, screw it, I might as well just eat as much as I want. And so you kind of go into this like free fall with it. So you're preventing that by having it more frequently. What I like to do, and this is where intuitive eating comes more in, we talked about hunger, but there's also the aspect of fullness too. And so often when we're like, oh, I just want it, we're not even paying attention to our fullness either, because we've deprived ourselves for so long that we eat beyond fullness, or even beyond that taste hunger of like, I already enjoyed it, but now I can't really taste it the same way. It's actually really interesting, the science of our taste buds and the way hunger works is that for the first like 5-10 minutes, we're really enjoying it. But then as we get more full, you don't enjoy it the same way. So that's where you can also kind of check in with yourself and say, do I still like this? Like, how am I liking this? And do I want to stop? That's more of an advanced skill. You don't have to go to that point at all. But it's that situation where you're sitting on the couch eating a bag of chips, and by the bottom of the bag, like, do you really like them the same way you did when you first had the first few?
Yeah, no.
Yeah. Your tongue starts to hurt a little bit. And
that's a hard one.
But one exercise that anybody can do right now is think of the ways that you might have rules about your eating, whether it's I shouldn't eat chocolate, or I shouldn't have fast food, or when you were just talking about chips, Karlee, you made me realize that I've always been raised with the chips are like an after dinner snack. Like, they're not something you have in the middle of the day. Why can't you have chips in the middle of the day? So like, think of one rule that you kind of hold fast to and mix it up and just challenge yourself to do it, because that takes that power away from it. So could you, Jen, buy yourself a whole chocolate bar and say, I'm going to enjoy this chocolate bar with peanut butter? Maybe Whitaker's makes an amazing peanut butter chocolate bar.
Okay. I've never heard of it. I will look.
Neither have I.
Very good.
Add that to the shopping list.
The best peanut butter and chocolate combo is just
so good.
The best.
But I'm going to allow myself to have this until I have satiated that desire. And if it's one square, it's one square. It might be 2 squares, 3 squares, who knows? But it's having more of a curiosity about it rather than I'm going to have 1 square and that's what I've told myself. Like, it's, again, going from that external rule to what does my body tell me is right.
Exactly. Instead of going into it with a rule. Yeah.
This may be like a very tough question, but are we born as intuitive eaters? Like, are our kids actually very good at intuitive eating, and it's something that as we get older with like how we're raised and how it is at school, like, and we're kind of more molded into that, I need to eat this, or like, you know, I was always told growing up, like, you need to finish what's on your plate. So like, you had to eat everything. It wasn't an option to stop when you were full. Like, you finish what's on your plate, right? So like, our kids, like, naturally, babies are always naturally very good at a lot of things, right? Like their body actually functions quite well. So is this one of those ways that kids are actually very good at this and we kind of teach them out of it?
Yes, theory would say that that is exactly what happens, and that it happens from such a young age. Like even you think when you're doing like baby-led weaning or starting off, already you're introducing rules about what they should and shouldn't be eating, or how much they should or shouldn't be eating.
I was gonna say, even with bottles, like people will say, oh, it's a waste, I can't waste this, they force their child to eat it, but like they're telling us they're full, so we're going against that already.
Yeah. And like scarcity, or like the value of food in terms of how much food costs, and I shouldn't be wasteful, or I've cooked this meal for you, you should be grateful for it, therefore you should finish your meal, or there's starving children in other countries. Like that's just like already injecting the emotion into eating, that I should feel guilty about what I'm eating or not eating.
That's why you pick that food up off the floor, you put it in a Tupperware, and you put it back in the fridge, and they're getting it again tomorrow.
Do you have any advice on parenting and with that intuitive eating of, like, in regards to your children? Like, kind of how can you try not to put that emotion, and you know, how can we do better with our kids?
Yeah, so I will admit I am very new to that world, and it's through my own parenting that I've had an interest in it. The people that I work with are typically adults. However, I'm very invested. I want my children to have a good experience. Ellen Satter is someone who is well known in that field, and she talks about division of responsibility, that as a parent, you choose what you put on the plate, and as the child, they decide what they put in their body. So maintaining that body autonomy, I get to decide what I prefer. So even being very careful with wording of what is good food or bad food, or what we should be eating or shouldn't be eating. I, did the whole baby-led weaning thing, assuming my child was going to be eating all the foods, and he did until he was a year and a half. And now he doesn't like green things, and he says things are yucky. He calls them all peppers. I don't eat peppers. And so we allow him to have his preferences. And, one of the things they say is exposure is so important. So we always put the greens on his plate. He does not have to eat them. There's no rule about eating them. But we also talk as a family about, we are a family that we value trying new things. Things can be kind of scary and funky at first, but we like to try new things and see if we like them. And we have a preference. Mummy doesn't like peppers. That's where he got it. Yeah. Mummy doesn't like peppers, but I do like them in an enchilada. So I'm going to put them in. We're making enchiladas this week. So like there's ways that I like things and ways that are not my favorite. And that doesn't mean that they're good or bad or yucky. It's just my food preference. So trying to give them that autonomy as well, but then repeated exposure and in different forms as well. So Karlee, when you're talking about the broccoli salad, I was like, I wonder if I doused it in cheese, like would he just try it?
I was just wondering. Thank you for answering that. I thought that was maybe a tough one.
Yeah, it's a tough one because we don't want to perpetuate like the diet culture stuff that we grew up in. But at the same time, it's so hard to like give your kids that autonomy when sometimes they just want to eat crackers and you're like tweaking out because you're like, I made this salmon for you. And they're like, give me chips. But yeah, it's hard.
As with all other parenting, like I'm assuming you guys go through this too, of you start questioning everything that comes out of your mouth of like, where did that come from? Was that a message from my parents that I actually don't agree with? Or is this in line with my parenting philosophy? So I think that's another thing too, of like, my son will, first thing in the morning, I want chips. And I'm like, well, no, we don't have chips first thing in the morning. And I'm like, why? Why do we not have chips first thing in the morning? What is my real reason other than a diet culture reason? And I'm like, well, we want to fuel our bodies with things that are going to keep us going. We want to fuel our bodies with things that are going to help us focus. So we can have chips later today for sure. But I want to make sure first we have our toast and our yogurt and our fruit. Then we can have chips. And so I'm just trying to be really cognizant of like what the messaging is and why.
Yes. Like, is that diet culture creeping back in? Because
I like that.
She'll get you.
And so it's not saying chips are bad and chips have no value to them, because that's something I want to be really careful of. But like, what are the other things that I can fuel myself with?
Or maybe he has eggs with chips on the side, because that sounds great together. So one more question for you here. Can you eat intuitively and practice intuitive eating while also trying to change your body? Or is that just like the diet culture version of intuitive eating?
I'd say it's a very dangerous diet culture. I think that the majority, if you just search intuitive eating, and this is why the intuitive, Evelyn Tribole and Elise Resch have developed their hashtag intuitive eating official, because so many people have tried to co-op intuitive eating. It's not a protected term, and so anybody can use it. It has kind of come into the new wave of healthy lifestyle dieting. So there is the risk, and the difficulty with it is that if you're always trying to change your body, you're always going to have that lingering feeling of, well, I should be reducing my portions, or I should be exercising more. And it again creates that external focus versus what's really going on in your body. It's a long game. Like, it's not something, and nobody can actually say what your personal healthy set point is. Your family doctor can't tell you. Like, genetics, epigenetics, like, these are all things they're going to be deciding. And the reality is, even if I was living my best intuitive life, my weight will still fluctuate throughout my life. It's like coming to terms with and accepting that things are not going to be stable, and it's actually not within my control. All I can do is be engaged in health-focused behaviors as I can.
So then can you practice intuitive eating and still allow yourself to eat emotionally? Like, what if you are like, I don't have physical hunger, but I want to sit down and eat this plate of nachos because it's going to make my, like, taste hunger happy. But then I guess that's still intuitive, because you're listening to a part of you, even though you're not physically hungry. Emotionally, you're like, I need this, and I'm going to eat it without guilt or shame. I'm just going to eat as much as I want to at this point.
Yes. Like, and like it gets more complicated and nuanced, and like there's lots of work you can do in that. There's like taste hunger, there's even practical hunger. You know, I might eat something before I go and run errands because I know I get hangry when I do that, and I lose touch with everything as I'm in chaos. However, I'm not super hungry right now. There becomes a difference in, like, we are emotional beings, right? Even when we go back to what we think about with babies, we feed a baby when it cries. So we're already engaging in an emotional relationship with food there. It's just when, like, the guilt and the shame come in, or that you're coping with your emotions, and it's the only coping strategy.
So thank you for sharing so much about all of that. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find you and kind of what you got going on right now?
Yeah, so you can find me online on Instagram. My handle is @Parallel Wellness. And I also have a YouTube channel where I talk about all of these things. It's Meredith Mackenzie, MacKenzie, Parallel Wellness. And my website is meredithmackenzie.ca. But I wanted to offer your listeners a special offer. I am introducing a new program which really takes people through the first 3 sessions where I work with my clients in private practice, where we go through a lot of the things that we've been talking about today and really make a customized plan for them. It's called Food Freedom in a Weekend, where you could essentially sit down, block out a weekend and do this yourself, but it's also self-paced, so you could take several weeks on it if you wanted to. So I just wanted to offer your listeners 10% off, and they can go get that anytime now.
Amazing.
So that's something that you'll be promoting on your Instagram, and they can also find it on your website?
Yes.
Yeah, perfect. I love that. And that'll be mostly like videos they listen to, or audio, or how we're reading, or how are they going to consume that course?
Yeah, so the program is all through an online education system. So it's video recorded, like, lessons that are there with my face. So we're actually talking to one another. And then there's a comprehensive workbook that comes with it, so that you can print it off or do it digitally and just work through it piece by piece. And I've tried to make it really tangible to be like, okay, what do you need in this moment, and what piece of reflection do you need? So there is that included as well. If you're uncertain and you're just saying to yourself, like, I have a recognition that I don't have a great relationship with food, but I don't know exactly where I fit in with all of this, I've created a quiz that's free to take. It takes less than 5 minutes. It's called the Eating Personality Quiz. Throwback to, 90s, early 2000s, where we were all taking all those quizzes and trying to determine our personality. Try to make some of this fun. And so you can go take that quiz at meredithmackenzie.ca/personality-quiz.
Awesome. We'll link that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing about all of this. This is, like, a personal therapy session for both Jen and I, and hopefully for everybody listening.
Yes.
And I just love it. This is so much of like what we need to hear.
Yes.
And this is the stuff we need to be talking about, not a lot of the other stuff that's out there. So this is good.
Actually listening to our body, respecting and honoring our body, and we need to work a bit more on this. So it's good to have these conversations. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for, bringing your own personal experiences as well.
Yeah. I mean, we could talk about this for hours.
Therapeutic.
Yes.
Yeah. We all needed it.
Yes.